Isak Pretorius, Group CEO of ForAfrika. Thank you so much for joining us today at the Social Capital Insider and the Center for Social Capital. It is really wonderful to have you here.
It's my privilege to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So much to talk about. As I said, you are the Group CEO of ForAfrika, and it's one of Africa's largest NGOs, but it also has a very powerful for-profit element to it, and they all work together in an extraordinary way to create an amazing amount of prosperity and opportunity in Africa. And we are going to get to the heart of that in this interview. But I first want to just thank you as well for the extraordinary thoughts that you added to our fairness article a while back. And really talked about the power and importance of opportunity, that it means creating an environment where every individual, as you said, regardless of gender, background, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status, has equal access to resources, information, and advancement based on merit, potential, and effort, rather than privilege or bias. And that was just so powerful and so important, and it really cut to what we really wanted to get out of that article. And I mean, you really could have been writing the whole article for us with the power of what you said, and we appreciated that so much. And maybe that's a great place to start and just explain what does ForAfrika do to make that happen, and how does it do it?
Yes, I mean, at ForAfrika, we're an integrated group as an organization, and so we cover both non-profit and for-profit, as you correctly said. But for us, it's not about that distinction. It's actually about how we engage with communities. And so our engagement with communities really starts wherever we meet them. And a big learning for us has been, and I think this actually talks into that fairness, actually, because many times, historically, communities have been approached, they've been told what their problems are, and they've been told what the solution is, and then they've been asked if they're prepared to support that solution. Okay, well, it's not their plan A. We know that that's a given. Okay, some plan that comes in from outside is generally not a community's plan A. The other thing we've come to really realize is that every community actually has a plan. They know what their real problems are, and sometimes those don't come up as the ones that are top of the list in a needs assessment, and they have a plan to change that. But until we go and engage with them differently, and we actually sit down and we respect them, and we understand what they perceive as their biggest challenges, and then ask them what their plan is. And it's crazy when you ask these communities what their plans are. They can be in the most broken environments where they have, total lack of resource, and where they're literally fighting for survival. And yet most times they'll articulate a plan that actually is about how they're going to lift themselves out of their current situation, use the resources that they have access to, plus the resources that they need, and then be able to get themselves to a point where, and it never ends in dependency, that plan. Okay, and so we engage with those communities where they're at. We meet them where they're at, and we call it the Plan A approach, where we go and listen. We listen to that community. We respect them. And when we hear from them what their Plan A is, then we take our knowledge, experience, expertise, and we help them to adjust that plan where necessary to create Plan A plus. Okay, and then we bring resources to that plan, because generally communities, you'll read many documents that say, well, we have community buy-in. Okay, what you actually have, though, in many cases, is support from community to the only thing that had resources on offer. But it's not their plan A, and it's therefore inherently unsustainable from day one, and in our opinion, in many ways, quite disrespectful to that very community. But when you engage in a way that listens, hears their plan, helps them polish and improve their plan, so we end up with Plan A plus, and then you bring resource to that plan, it's inherently sustainable from day one, because the community owns it. It's their plan. They've got to make it happen, not you. And you're there to support them in that journey. And so that's where we establish true strategic partnerships, I want to call it, with those communities. And then we walk a journey with them. And so if you see what the promise of the organization is, we say we're in it for the long haul until the job is done and Africa thrives. And what does that mean? That means that we're joining a community and we're walking a journey with them that is a continuous journey. We call that our dynamic development continuum. And so it starts where we meet that community. And initially, most of the effort is humanitarian and development related because we are stabilizing those communities. We're ensuring that they've got access to the basic resources they need, food and water and hygiene and education and access to health services. But then we get to a tipping point, and this is where we actually migrate from the non-profit humanitarian and development services into the more for-profit or social capital type work, where we engage with that community very differently, because now what it becomes about is not being self-sufficient, which we've achieved through phase one. It becomes about being commercially viable, because I can't make anyone thrive. Chris, you and I, we could have unlimited access to resources and still not thrive, because I believe that thriving is a result of a complex set of decisions that we make on a daily basis. So you can have unlimited resources and still not thrive. You can also have very limited resources and thrive. So I can't make anyone thrive. But what we can do as an organization is give the platform on which people are able to make those decisions and are able to thrive. We call that platform commercial viability. And so we do that in a very structured, proven process where we actually take large-scale commercial offtake agreements that we're able to secure because of our size and robustness as an organization. And we then take those and we aggregate them out to local producers. So an example is in Uganda. We have a milk offtake agreement with one of the largest dairy processors, $40 million of milk that we've got to supply. We're busy aggregating that out now to over 15,000 small commercial dairy farmers in the country. And we engage with them, help them develop a business plan to be able to scale and maximize their profitability through improving their quantity and quality of supply. And then we issue them with a loan that activates that business plan. But that loan is not in cash. So we put them on our platform, we issue them with a credit card, and in that credit card, they have a voucherized loan, which is also wallet locked. So they can't spend animal feed money on veterinary services and vice versa. So we're de-risking that loan almost totally. And then we take the cash that backs that loan and we invest it in the local goods and services businesses that are going to fulfill on that loan. And there we go low cash. So we provide consignment stock, assets on lease, some cash support. Then we put ourselves down at the center, physical infrastructure, operate as a cooperative and collateral manager, and we provide the services needed to really ensure that this whole ecosystem works and that we're able to consolidate the supply and supply back in, providing the logistic services as well to our master offtake. So we create a circular economy that is a platform for true commercial viability and building grassroots economies. And so that's what we do in our social enterprise or for-profit side of what we're doing. The truth is, it's a for-profit in the sense that it needs to be a commercial business that trades. It is owned by our foundation 100%. And so at the end of the day, the profits from that actually go back into this dynamic development continuum to help us to continue to build this out community after community. And that way we're able to ensure that we create a truly sustainable version of self-sufficiency and then migrate communities into the ability to thrive. We call it thrivability.
Isak, that's genius. I mean, that is absolutely brilliant, and I'm literally blown away not only by what you do, but how brilliantly you describe it as well, which is always a favorite thing for any interviewer to say. I really appreciate that, but that really is extraordinary. And I mean, this is a formula for saving the world, in a lot of ways. So, thank you for doing what you're doing. And this is really the exact model that we talk about when we talk about how social capital and capitalism focused on propagating prosperity for all can really work. I mean, this is a perfect example of it. You have a pretty fascinating and interesting story of your background, and how this all kind of began. You have a family story that is incredibly rich, from your father, and how he started, laying the groundwork for this. And I would love it if you would share that with our viewers, because it really is an extraordinary story.
Yeah, I mean, look, my dad is one of my absolute heroes, and I had the privilege of having a father who was so focused on fighting injustice, and to him, that was the reality. Nelson Mandela said an amazing thing. He said, "Overcoming poverty is not a task of charity." He said it is an act of justice. And my
Mm.
father really believed that, like he lived that out. And so my dad had gone to Mozambique, early 1980s. He was a white South African. What he knew about Mozambique, this is the middle of the apartheid era, was
Mm.
that this was, a communist country that was, harboring terrorists and trying to overthrow South Africa. And that was the propaganda that had been given at the time. And my dad actually started helping some refugees from Mozambique in his local area where he was a farmer at the time. And as he engaged with these refugees, he was shocked by their stories, because these were not stories of what he was seeing or was being led to believe about Mozambique. These were heartbreaking stories of a country in the middle of a civil war, experiencing a famine that sounded intense. And so peace agreement was signed with Mozambique. My dad was a bit of a maverick. My dad had grown up incredibly poor himself. So he used to steal milk every morning from different houses after it had been dropped off by the milk truck. And he would jump over the wall every morning at 2 or 3 a.m. and connect a garden hose to the neighbor's faucet in their garden, and be able to fill up all their water containers and their basins in their house, because they had their water and electricity had been cut off. So my dad knew what it was to be poor, and then
Yeah.
he was an incredible entrepreneur and had done very well. And so after the peace agreement with Mozambique was signed, my dad got in his car and he drove to Maputo, the capital city. And he started meeting with people, and eventually met with a man, Minister Shizano, who later became President Shizano, was an incredible president of that nation. And as my dad spoke with him, he explained to him that Mozambique was experiencing a famine similar to Ethiopia, but that no one was talking about it because of their Marxist status. And so my dad asked to see, they put him in a government aircraft, flew him to the middle of the country, went to an IDP camp with, close to 40,000 people in this camp. And the pilot of the aircraft said, "Mr. Pretorius, there's no fuel here. I'm going to go and refuel in a neighboring city. I'll collect you this evening." Well, my dad went back to the airport day after day for 10 days. The pilot never came back. Now, he had arrived at this IDP camp with a couple of bottles of water and a lunchbox. He was supposed to be there for a day. And he spent 10 days in this IDP center with close to 40,000 people, no clean water. He got so sick himself, no food in this center. So he ate his lunchbox, and that was that for him too. But the reality was that he buried more than 300 people who starved to death while he was there. They just dug
Wow.
mass trench graves and just buried more than 300 people. He said that one day he needed to just kind of clear his head. And I mean, the civil war is raging around this area where he was. And he said it was totally unsafe, but he just needed to get out of there. So he just went for a walk. And he just walked and walked in the bush. And he got to a village eventually where he discovered families in this village. Not a single adult was alive. Some children were still alive. And the parents had actually starved to death, giving the children the last of the food they had. And my dad said that this was the most fundamental, life-changing experience for him. He said that he thought he knew poverty. He thought what he had grown up with was poverty, and he said it was the inconvenience of not having enough resource. What he discovered in Mozambique was true poverty. And so he committed the rest of his life to changing this injustice, okay? And that is what is ForAfrika today. More than 40 years later, we're 41 years old now. And that started as an emergency response to Mozambique.
Okay.
And we still do emergency programs, and sometimes we get criticism for them, Chris, because it's like, well, you're giving fish. We say, yes, well, we proudly give fish. No, but you should teach people to fish, because then you feed them for a lifetime. And I say to people, I don't disagree with you at all. That's why we also teach people to fish. But the truth is that there is a role for giving fish to keep people alive long enough for them to learn how to fish. There are still many people on our continent who, if we don't give them a fish, will die before we teach them how. And then what have we done? We've wasted both the training fees, and more importantly, we've wasted the human life, okay? So idealism doesn't work in the context of, failed environments, of, places that many people in the world can't understand. Because many of the places we work, the countries that we serve in, the communities that we partner with, there are no safety nets. You are your safety net.
Yeah.
Okay? There's no other safety net. So you fall, there's nothing to catch you. Okay? Unless your community catches you, there's nothing to catch you. And so there's a role for giving fish. I also find it interesting because people say that to me, and then I say, but what about children? Surely child labor is not the solution to Africa's problem. Okay, surely we need to feed kids in school so that by feeding them in school, they're actually getting an education, they're learning how to fish. Okay, and so there's a role for that. But then there's a fundamental, critical role in teaching people to fish. Absolutely, and we're fully engaged in that. But here's the thing: I don't think teaching to fish is the silver bullet either. Okay, because the reality is, what I've seen is incredible programs with amazing reports, and I'll own this. I'm not going to criticize anyone else. We've done incredible programs, written amazing reports of how we increased tomato production, and the women who were growing tomatoes are now growing 5x what they used to grow. That sounds so successful. Wow, you taught them to fish, and now they're fishing, and look how many fish they're catching. But here's the reality of that story. When you dig deep into it, those women are still sitting at the same little school desk in the local market, selling their tomatoes to the same market. So what's happened to the 5x production? There's been an equal 5x reduction in the price or value of tomatoes in their market. So they're actually hardly making anything more than what they were before. And in fact, tomatoes are now going to waste. So we can't just teach people to fish. We actually have to build the fishing businesses that are going to, and the fishing industry that is going to make all of that work. And so in the tomato example, what does that mean? That's putting in an ability to process tomatoes and to then send them to other markets. Okay, so that we're now taking that 5x production and we're actually turning it into something that means that profitability, income and profitability actually follow that same trajectory of the 5x, and that you now are able to do value addition, which means that you have an even greater multiplier on that. And so 5x in production might be 10x in income. And so this, for me, is why we have ended up with this dynamic development continuum. But this goes all the way back to my dad's story and to my privileged upbringing, as I describe it. And when I say privileged, people picture silver spoon and, fancy holidays. That wasn't the privilege I had. The privilege I had as an upbringing was my dad was my best friend. So I would rather have hung out with my dad than any one of my friends. And so school vacations, he stuck me in a plane with him, and I would go work in a refugee camp or some crisis somewhere in Africa and be part of what we were doing. And what it did for me was a couple of things. It created that same disdain that my dad had and that Nelson Mandela spoke about when he speaks about overcoming poverty not being about charity, but about being about justice. And I, as an African, developed this incredible disdain for injustice. I feel that there is so much injustice on our continent, and I grew up experiencing it and seeing it. And the second thing, though, for me was that I grew up seeing the opportunity. I think that's the gift that God gave me, is I see opportunities in places that don't look like opportunity, okay? And I see the of what that opportunity looks like. And so for me, even as a teenager going into these environments, I saw the opportunity that was there. I used to drive my dad nuts because they were like, but Dad, what if they had a business doing this? But Dad, what if we could get them to do that? Then they can, we can change this equation. And that I think is also part of the family story of why we're doing what we're doing today and why we have this dynamic development continuum that is kind of a, emergency to self-sufficiency to thrivability journey, is because as a family, we made that commitment. But ForAfrika is not a family organization. This is not a family business. We employ well over 500 full-time staff. At any given time, we'll have somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000 people working in our teams overall. And me, myself, even in the organization, I am not here because I'm family. I'm here because of a deep commitment to the vision for Africa to thrive, and because I want to serve that vision, and because our board believes that I'm the right leader at this time, and I'm the easiest person to fire in this organization, and that's the way. So it's not something that it grew out of a family. We call ourselves ForAfricans, and in many ways we are like a family as an organization, but it is far more than that. It's an organization that is on a mission to see Africa thrive.
Again, so brilliantly described, and I think you hit it on the head with that systemic explanation and description. And it really sounds like a recipe for, I mean, honestly, like I said when you first started describing this, of saving the world. How's it working so far in Africa to create thriving communities and organizations, and how's it going?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's no easy task. And we have some great successes, and we have some failures, because we also don't control everything in these environments. We don't control what the weather does. We can guard against that in some ways. We don't control the geopolitical situation. There's those macro elements that are outside of our control. We try to structure what we do to make ourselves as immune to those things as possible, or to guard against them and prepare for them as much as we possibly can. And so the journey is well on its way. I mean, we have just last year, I can give you the exact numbers. This year's numbers are not wrapped up yet, but last year, 6.3 million people that we provided direct support and assistance to. So those are 6.3 million people that are somewhere in this journey. And so how we measure this, Chris, and this is our measure of success and impact, is we have two key indices. So one is our Sustainable Livelihoods Index. So Sustainable Livelihoods Index measures the self-sufficiency of a community. And so every community we engage in, we have baselines, we know exactly where they're at, and we mark them on our dynamic development continuum. And so we know where they're at, and then through the Sustainable Livelihoods Index, we actually track their progress to getting to self-sufficiency, okay? And so this year alone, we will see over 400,000 people that will actually achieve self-sufficiency, okay?
Wow. Wow.
fact, on our sustainable livelihoods index. And so we know that they've got all the resources they need, etc., to now be at a point where they're self-sufficient. And then in the second phase, for creating the platform to thrive and going from self-sufficiency to thrivability, we have our thrivability index. And so there we do the same thing. So then we start to track their access to all different components around commercial viability and being able to scale, etc. And that way be able to prove their thrivability, the ability to thrive, because we can't make them thrive, as I was saying earlier. And so there, our target for this year was 40,000 people that would be at that point, and then continue to scale that. We want to see 500,000 people in the next 3 years, so 500,000 that are on that platform to thrive. And of course, the development side of what we're doing to get into self-sufficiency will continue to grow. Ultimate goal for us in the next 10-year cycle is to see 20 million people self-sufficient and 6 million people having a platform to thrive. And we've got the ability to do it, and we've got the ability to track it. And so for me, those are fundamental components. And we have the most, I mean, any other organization should be jealous of the teams that I have. I mean, we have the most incredible people in this organization. 99% are African. Most come from the very communities that they're working in. And that is a true power for us, because that means that our Africanism is able to actually play out to its greatest strength, because we understand local context, we're rooted and grounded in those local communities, and we have the ability to live up to our promise that we're not going to leave. We're in it for the long haul until Africa thrives.
And you are a perfect proof of your systemic system, because your profits from the nonprofit go back into feeding the nonprofit, and it is this perfect circle, right?
Yeah, I mean, it creates that sort of internally for us within our group a regenerative economy, or a circular in many ways. And I think, for me, because I look at business differently. I mean, I've been in investment banking. I haven't been in this, humanitarian and development world all my life. I've spent quite a bit of my working life in that. I'm 49 next year, so 50 is chasing me with a knife. In the space of 30 years or so of a career, I've spent a chunk of that in humanitarian and development work. I've also spent a chunk in pure commercial business and investment banking and fund management, that kind of thing. And what that's done is it's shaped my view. I was so passionate about solving the injustices of poverty that the non-profit humanitarian and development work was so fulfilling for many years. But then it became so frustrating, because I remember saying to my father one day, when I was actually leaving the non-profit, I said to my dad, he said, why? Where are you going? What you going to do now? And I said, Dad, I cannot commit the rest of my life knowing that the children we help today, we will be helping their children in the next generation. I said, I can't look my kids in the eye one day and tell them that that's what I dedicated my life to. It's not creating enough change. And I said to him, listen, what we're doing is brilliant. We are saving millions of lives. We are impacting so many communities, and we're having a true impact. But the reality is, it is not transformational enough. So he said, so what are you going to do about it? I said, I'm going to go build economies. And he kind of looked at me like, I was nuts. And he said, how are you going to do that? So I said, well, I'm going to capitalize a fund, and we're going to invest in agricultural assets, and we're going to start creating the ability to really build agricultural economies, because, I mean, that's one of the lowest hanging fruits, excuse the pun, in Africa. And so, this was my focus, and I had my research, and I had my thesis, and I started building a team, and off we went, and we did exactly that. And then that morphed and evolved into many different things. And what I will tell you is that we made some shareholders really happy because their bank balances changed quite significantly. And we, had some impact in the sense that more jobs were created, etc. I got equally frustrated because it wasn't creating the transformational effect that I thought it would. What I came to learn, Chris, was that it's definitely, Africa is where it is today, not because there is not enough charity. That's for sure. Okay. We can talk about how that charity is used, but it's not because there's not enough charity. And it's also not because there isn't enough business or business opportunity or investment. I believe that we sit where we sit as a continent because there isn't a bridge between those two worlds. The commercial world and the development world have been so separated. The commercial world looks at the development world and says, you non-profit people, we love you. You've got such beautiful hearts, but you're a bunch of do-gooders who don't understand how the world really works. Okay. And you're just creating dependency. And, best case, you're helping some people and saving some lives. Worst case, you're perpetuating your existence and creating dependency. And the non-profit world looks at the commercial world and says, you bunch of evil capitalists who are just coming to rape religion and extract maximum profit. And so these two worlds just continue charging in their beliefs. And this one, the commercial one, throws a little bit of money across, the chasm to make themselves feel better. And these guys take it, even though they feel these people are all evil, but they take it because it's the only way to fund their existence. Okay. And that chasm just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And over 200,000 children will die this month on the continent of Africa from malnutrition alone, from not having fish. Okay. And the reality is that happens because of this chasm. And so I then said, now I've found the thing I'll give the rest of my life to, building the bridge between the two and pulling these worlds together. And so for me, I don't see non-profit and for-profit. I see for good business. I think we have to build businesses that are for good. And yes, they have to be for the good of a shareholder, because people who invest money into a business need to see some kind of return, but that return is impact first, okay? And so it's for the good of shareholders, it's for the good of the community, it's for the good of the employees, it's also for the good of the environment. And so I think if we shift our mindset from this system that says, well, you non-profit and you for-profit, and we actually shift that to a mindset that says, no, let's be about being for good businesses. I actually think that our businesses will become far more profitable over time, okay? And I believe that they will inherently be way more sustainable. And I actually think that a lot of what we see in negative practice, the growth in pure stomach fillers have zero nutritional value or very little nutritional value. Why have we seen that growth? Because that's really profitable. And there's a whole lot of people around the world who are desperately trying to fill their stomach. But if we were for good business, we wouldn't go about it in that way. We would be looking to maximize the nutritional value at the lowest possible price. Why? Because that now is actually creating something that is a for good business, still profitable, but is going to actually have a positive impact on our world, on the individual, etc.
That's brilliant. Again, I think you've perfectly verbalized what we try to talk about so much, because we get people that say, "Oh, you're all about business solving the world's problems. You don't believe there's a role for government." No, there's a role for everybody. I think it's a system, and I think what you've said about that systemic solution, obviously the problem is systemic, so the solution has to be systemic. These are not just, random anomalies that this many people are starving in the world, or that this many people don't have jobs, or that this many people don't have health care. These are systemic issues. We can argue about why they occurred, but I think it is inarguable that they are systemic in some way, shape, or form. And so they have to be treated with a systemic solution. And I think you're you're hitting on something that is not only the solution for Africa, but probably for the world in general. Because though the industry might change, you are focusing on agriculture when you began, but regardless of the industry, I think this formula that you've come up with is absolutely portable all over the world and can be applied to to create a really new dynamic in which I think we really could have prosperity and abundance for all, but we've got to come together to do that. So I love what you're doing, and I really don't rave this much about most of the people I interview. I express admiration, but I am downright blown away by what you're doing and how you've expressed it so brilliantly and eloquently. And I thank you for what you're doing. This is incredible.
No, Chris, look, we're a piece in the puzzle, and I appreciate what you say, and we are very diligent about how we've gone about doing this, about how we develop it. There are so many minds that have fed into this and helped us as we've developed and refined it. It is by no means perfect, and we're the first ones to admit that. We definitely lead with the principle that we should not let perfection get in the way of progress, and so we are about getting the job done perfectly. Okay, but I appreciate you sharing that, and I agree with you. I think this is something that can be applied around the world. This is not that's unique to Africa or unique to the developing world. I was sitting with a billionaire businessman in London a couple of weeks ago, and we were having a similar conversation to this over lunch. And he looked at me at one stage and he said, "Do you not want to come and do this in the UK?" so, which
you should. Yes.
I found that interesting, because if you look at the history of the UK and Africa and all of this, and the fact that someone's kind of saying, "Hey, maybe we should bring a model out of Africa back to the UK now to actually come and apply this." We equally appreciate what you're doing, Chris, because what you're doing is so fundamentally important to this whole process, and that for me is. I know people talk about building a movement, and I actually find it a little bit nauseous at times, to be honest with you, because everyone's building a movement these days about something. Okay, and I understand we need that, but the truth is that in many ways is actually how we view things. We're not building for Africa. We're about Africa thriving, and we understand that takes a multiplicity of actors. That takes us all coming together and working alongside one another about actually creating a movement for thriving. And I think it's a movement for thriving in Africa, and hopefully it becomes a movement for thrivability globally. Eventually, if that's where it lands, that would be awesome. But it takes every single piece and everyone in that system to actually do what they do. And what you guys are doing is so critical in that, because you're actually raising that awareness. You're presenting the models that work. You're changing mindsets. And changing mindsets, I mean, firstly, that's one of the most difficult things to do. But secondly, changing mindsets is actually the flashpoint that ignites the wildfire of change that actually ends up really happening. And so we're equally appreciative of you and of what you're doing, and of you staying up really late at night to interview someone.
Well, you're very welcome for that. And I had no trouble staying awake at all listening to your riveting explanation of what you do and how you do it. And you keep taking the words right out of my mouth as well, which is a pretty impressive thing to do. And that word awareness is, we are really about changing the thinking pattern from either or. And you verbalized it again so perfectly. It's a system that will lead to prosperity for all. Not just band-aids here, band-aids there, a new idea here, a new idea there. It's a new paradigm that has to happen. And I think more than anyone I've probably ever talked to or ever interviewed, and I've interviewed everybody you can imagine from the top to the bottom and everything in between. You have hit on something here absolutely brilliant, and we want to give as much attention to you and what you're doing as we can, and we will. So please feel free to talk to us anytime you want and tell us about what you're doing. Hopefully we can maybe get you to come out here for some of our events as well, and really connect you, because one of my big pet peeves for years is that Africa doesn't get any attention in the West. It gets almost none. And when it does, it's all very negative usually. And it's extraordinary what you're doing there. And the opportunities that are there are really a palette for what can happen all over the world, and can be a great testing ground for everything there. Because if you can do it there, and you can succeed at building prosperity there, one of the most challenging places in the world to do it, then certainly it can be done anywhere else in the world. So I am incredibly excited, Isak.
No, thank you, Chris, and I will take you up on that invitation. I mean, we're constantly needing more and more people to come alongside us. We only do what we can be the best in the world at doing, and we're a partnership organization. We're always looking for partners. Of course, at the end of the day, it also takes resource. We're building $100 million of debt fund that we need to capitalize to empower these social enterprise businesses. And of course, on the humanitarian and development side, there's always need there too. And so, we're always looking for every level of partner that actually comes in and is a part of this journey, and people like you and your platforms, and give the ability for us to plug into those key partners. But as you say, to also share this message and to share this model. And I always say to people, man, I invite you to Africa. Come to the place with the greatest entrepreneurs. And they kind of look at me like, they were expecting. Yeah, and I say to them, well, come on, understand where many of us start from. To survive from one day to the next, in many parts of our continent, you have to be an entrepreneur. That's a true entrepreneur. Okay?
Yeah.
And that spirit is there, and innovation is happening in Africa like you can't believe. There have been as many unicorns in Nigeria as Singapore in the last 5 years.
Wow.
People just are like,
I did not know that.
And people don't know why, because Africa Africa is getting on with it, but this isn't exposed. And when it is exposed, what do we see? We see the negative things. We see the governance issue, and we see and listen, those things are here, okay, but they're also everywhere else in the world, to be honest, okay.
Sure.
We do have our challenges, and leadership is one of the greatest challenges we have. But how are we going to change leadership? Are we going to change it by throwing stones at it, or are we going to change it by influencing it? And by doing, coming together and doing what we're doing, and creating these communities that have, are now self-sufficient and then have a platform to thrive by educating people. What are you doing? You're actually creating the very thing you need to influence that leadership and see that change happen. And so I feel that even the things that don't get directly addressed through these partnerships are indirectly being impacted and affected, and those continue to grow from there. So we welcome the partnership. And we invite you at any time to come and be a part of what we're doing. Come and see it, come and partner with us in it, and also to come and take lessons learned from our amazing continent, the incredible innovation that's happening. Yeah, one of the fastest growing fintech regions in the world. Take Nigeria and Kenya alone. They're two of the fastest growing fintech countries in the world. And many economies that are growing at 6% and 8%. Where do you find that other places? So yeah, we've got our risk, But we've also got ways of really reducing that risk and managing that. But we have incredible opportunity on this continent. And I believe that the future of Africa is fundamentally essential to the future of the world. And why do I say that? Well, by latest, 2050, we will be the largest and also the youngest population in the world. 1 in 4 people will be African. Okay. And so the truth is, at that stage, a destabilized Africa is not a oh shame poor Africa. A destabilized Africa is a destabilized world. And so, I think we have to start looking at investing in Africa also through a different lens. I often say to European investors when I meet with them, I say, do you like where you live? Is my first question. And they kind of look at me like I'm nuts. And I'm saying, no, just work with me here. Do you like where you live? Yes. Do you want the environment you live in to be the same or better for your children? Yes. Well, then you better start investing in Africa. Okay. Because otherwise, that may well not be the case. Because if you've got the largest and youngest population in the world with a total lack of jobs, and with no industry being developed and with no ability to actually take care of themselves and to have a platform to thrive, then we're going to have a fundamentally destabilized world. And this is a breeding ground for all kinds of things we don't want. The other side of it is that the world is going to struggle to feed itself more and more. And Africa is literally, it's the last frontier for development of agriculture. We have I think it's over 70% now of the unfarmed arable land in the world, with incredible levels. And yes, there's infrastructure challenges to that. And yes, there's a lot that has to be done to be able to access the full capacity of that. But the truth is that if the world is going to feed itself into the future, Africa is going to have to become a fundamental breadbasket. Well, now, if we invest in that and the industrialization of Africa, then we have now capitalized on what could become the greatest threat to the world and turned it into the greatest opportunity or greatest positive impact. And so I think we've got to start thinking differently about Africa and how we invest in Africa now, immediately, so that that trajectory looks very different in 10, 20, 30, 50 years' time.
Incredibly important thoughts. And we're going to try to bring as much awareness of that and what you do to you. Tell everybody your website so everyone knows where they can learn more about you.
Yeah, so they can go to ForAfrika. So it's FOR, Africa with a K, forafrika.org. And that's where you'll be able to access our information. And we welcome you to join the journey.
Well, Isak, thank you so much for spending this time. It's really been incredibly informative and enlightening and everything else. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I know our readers and our viewers are going to thoroughly enjoy it. And we will definitely look forward to talking with you more again and bringing you all kinds of opportunities to bring attention to what you do and the opportunities that are there in Africa as well for everybody else in our network and who's reading and listening. So thank you so much, Isak.
No, thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate it. It was an absolute privilege to be with you today.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.